Kia ora koutou, nau mai, hara mai. We can see that all of you who have signed up are joining in. We're going to wait a couple of minutes as you all come into our space. Kia ora, I'm seeing names as they're coming through. I want to acknowledge we have my colleague here, the Honorary Eugenie Sage, who was the Minister for Conservation in the last term, so welcome. Oh, Gillian Wood from the Tairāwhiti. Amazing. Kapai. Okay, the numbers have settled, so I'm going to get us started. Nau mai, hara mai, kia koutou katoa. Ko Elizabeth Kerekere tēnei, he mokopuna o te Tāmati. Ko whānau ākai, ko te aitanga māhaki, ko Ngāti Onioni, ko rongo whakāta me ngai tamanihiri o kunei iwi, ki te taha o tōku pāpa, ki te taha o tōku mama noa airangi, ko County Clare me County Tipperary. And I'm just seeing that Maria from the Hawke's Bay, kia ora, can't hear. Perhaps it's just you. Could anybody else in the chat just see if you can hear us? Okay, kia ora Nico. So, kia ora Dana and Tane. Tāne. So we'll keep rolling. Maria, good luck. Good luck with sorting out your sound. So where was I? Yes, I'm one of the Green Party MPs, and part of my work for our party is around Hoki Whenua mai. We did a discussion document a few months ago and we sent it out to hear back from people. What are the different types of mechanisms? What levers do we need to pull for Māori to get land back across the country, land that's been held in different government departments through state-owned enterprises and private ownership, and what are some of the ways that we can help use those levers from our place in Parliament to get that land back, and also to focus on, though, not about us telling iwi hapu what to do, that in this series of webinars we're looking at is hearing from our whānau on the ground, our leaders, and just seeing what is going on for people and how can we help. We have an amazing lineup tonight. As you can see, Roger Maaka, Tame Malcom, and the legendary Tāmati Kruger. And I'm not going to talk for much longer. This is focused on DOC. DOC owns approximately 1/3 of this country. It seems to me the best idea would be that they just give it all back, especially those where they're in co-governance with iwi and hapu. And for those very few ones where apparently there is dispute over who are the iwi in any particular space, then my thinking is always let the iwi sort that out, and government should not be part of those conversations. So I am going to honestly just hand it over right now, and I'd like to welcome Roger to introduce yourself and give us a kōrero about what's happening for you over there. Kia ora.
Kia ora, tēnā koe iri hātu. Ai te iwi e whakarongo mai nā. I mai taki mai nei, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Ko Roger Maaka tēnei, o ngai tahu ki takapau, o roto Ngāti Kahungana. Ai te pōnei a koro au, o tō mātou roto, mahinga kai, taonga tuku ihu, iho, e Ngāti, e a mātou tipuna. So I'm going to talk about our lake. In our case, it has been returned to us, and just speak about the consequences of receiving a taonga back from DOC and what it does to our hapu and our resources and our capabilities. So just to identify the lake, it is Lake Whaituma from the township of Waipukurau. It's about a 15-minute drive south of the township. It's described as an ephemeral wetland, which means there's no actual limits to the lake. It floods. And so when the heavy rains come, it floods out, and then when it dries up, it shrinks in. And that's known as an ephemeral wetland. Most people who go visit Waipukurau or drive through Waipukurau don't even know that the lake is there. So it has very little public image whatsoever. But for our people, it was the not just a mahinga kai, but it is the basis of our whole hapu identity. Our tupuna who first walked those lands, we know as Whata, and he immediately got into contest with another tohunga, Tongawhiti, and they contested about who could get their hinaki prepared and put into the lake. Whata won the contest, and the hills that he stood on are now called Ngā Kai Hinaki a Whata. And from that stage, our people claimed the lake. And over the centuries, our people have defended it from Kurahaupo people, Tāki Tumu people, and all sorts of people who have passed through our whenua. And it's central to who we are. In 1853, Maclean came into Hawke's Bay and started into action those transactions. And the one I'm talking about is known as the Waipukurau Purchase, which took place in 1852. And it took up most of our lands inside that purchase. And unknown to our tipuna, it also included the lake. And even though there was a promise of reserves, that wasn't kept. However, our people kept using the lake right up until around World War II, when we were finally denied access. And then it just became an occasional activity. Hence, one of our objectives is to reconnect our people with the lake. So DOC took over the lake, and I don't know when, but I guess at the formation of DOC, and when DOC did take over all these lands, and have had it ever since. There's no evidence of them behaving like a responsible owner. The lake is severely degraded. The water quality, the tuna which our people used to feed off had diminished. The lake itself dries out in the droughts that we have in Central Hawke's Bay. And the fish and bird life struggle to survive in those periods of time. So we were given the lake back, or more precisely, the 100 hectares at the southern western side of the lake. We were given it back as part of our Taonga Tamatea settlement. But ironically, that was written into the settlement, but ironically that it came back to us and we didn't even know we had it. We received no communications from Doc or from anyone that the lake had been transferred into our name or into the names of the Treaty Trust. So that was the first, I suppose, message that was given by Doc. In other words, they didn't give a shit. So, and we've received nothing since then. The Treaty Trust appointed a group of 4 of us to manage the lake on behalf of the hapu, and I chair that small group. Oh, I should make one other point, is that the lake's name is Whātuma, but you'll see on all of the geographic posts and public signposts, Hātuma. So the name was corrupted, and that's part of our journey, is to re-establish it as Whātuma. Anyway, so we have received it back, and along with it, all the responsibilities that come with managing, owning, running what they call a recreational reserve. So the land that they had was put into, by status, was put into a recreational reserve. I think the Act is 1977, something like that. We were given it back, as I said, without any instruction, any idea of what our responsibilities were under that Act. There's some historical documents that says that Doc had some kind of lease arrangement with local farmers, that these lease arrangements expired in 2014, but we don't know anything else other than that. So we have had the job of, or having the job, as we became active in June 2020. Not coincidentally, it was just after the lockdown of 2020, when our people started to look a bit wider than reacting to the lockdown. And that's when we became active as a management group. And since that time, we have tried to find out as much information as we can about our lake, formal information. And indeed, there's very little. Having said that, we know that there are reports, there are other instruments that are carried out that do exist, but no one has given us the passageway or the access to these. And so we're spending a lot of time working to dig those documents up to find out what the actual state of our lake is. We do know that it's polluted. We do know that you couldn't bathe in the lake, that the water, there's an algae bloom that comes in when we have the hot weather, and the bird and fish life and the plant life, there's invasive species. The lake bank, the area that we have, is incredibly willow infested, of 2 types of willow, and approximate quote which would probably cost about $2 or $3 million to get rid of the willow that's infested there. We're a very small group. We have no resources. And the cry from our people is that the settlers and everybody else degraded our lake and used our lake since 1852. Now we get it back, and we're supposed to revive the lake and recover the lake as responsible kaitiaki with no resources to use our money, our contacts. And the reality is that we don't have any. However, we are still optimistic and our hapu and all the members are quite excited about the challenge, but we are hacked off with the lack of engagement and the lack of support that Doc gave us. Elizabeth, I think that's as far as I can take it at this point, and we'll join the discussion later.
Kia ora, thank you so much for sharing this kōrero with us. I'm making lots of notes and I've got some ideas of how some practical things that we can help to support. So we'll have that kōrero later. And I'm going to pass over to Tame. Kia ora.
Mauri ora kia tātou, ko te wako o te aroa tēnei, ko utaina mai ki wangini a tātou, kāti, ko Ngāti Te Rāwhai, Ngāti Pikia o ku iwi, ko Tame Malcom tēnei, e mihi kaua tūna kia koutou katoa. As for me, I've been involved in DOC since I left school, basically. I started out as operations. First, I started off just doing contract work, cutting tracks here and there and setting possum traps here and there. Worked as a ranger, I've worked in management as a director, and I've worked for DOC in the governance space on the conservation board. But I think what's probably more relevant here is the 2 years I spent as part of the options development group. And for those of you who don't know, it was a group of independents that basically got to pull apart DOC's policies as a result of the Ngāi Tāmaki decision. But basically, we had free rein to look at all of their policies to see what's working and what's not working in giving effect to Section 4 of the Conservation Act, basically, which says they have to give effect to the principles of the treaty. So the court found that they weren't giving effect to the principles of the treaty, and I consider myself blessed to figure out why they weren't doing it. And long story short, the conservation system is messed up. We inherited a messed up system. It was a system of legislation that was built off cultural differences. So you had people from, our first conservation system was established to protect introduced species. And then it just built off from there. So we didn't have a great foundation. Coupled with that, just adding legislation on top of legislation that worked against our constitution. So when our tupuna signed the treaty, or te tiriti, that they were assured they would still keep the rights to their taonga, like kereru and rata. Nowhere did they imagine that I would, one of their descendants would have to go to the Crown to ask permission to eat kereru, to fell a rata. And that's all thanks to the legislation we have in place. So if we are wanting to figure out a way to be better treaty, or give effect to the partnerships of the principles of the treaty, I think we need to pull apart everything that's in the conservation system. And I just see Sian's chucked in a link to the Options Development Group report. Well worth a read, 77 pages, but there are 7 recommendations, and I won't go into them, but suffice to say, the top one is get rid of the whole system. It is not working. We are losing biodiversity at an alarming rate, and so we need a system that is bespoke for Aotearoa, it's fit for purpose, but builds on the fact that it is a tiriti nation. So as we look forward as well, and talking about giving whenua back, which I am all for, the issue I face, or I always see pop up, is department officials saying, what is the mechanism? How are you going, if we give this whenua back, how will you protect it? Which to me is a slap in the face in the first instance. Anyone with an understanding of Aotearoa history knows that after about 250 years of arrival, our tupuna learnt how to live with the environment. So they brought mātauranga from the Polynesian Islands, from Hawaii. When they got here, they didn't realize it wasn't working. After 250 years, that's when we started to see a change in what would have essentially become Māori culture. And then from that time right up till Pākehā arrival, our tupuna knew how to live within the environment without causing negative and long-lasting impacts. But you don't need to take my word for it. It's in the research at the moment, and the previous environmental reporting stuff that showed that biodiversity was declining at a lesser rate on Māori-owned land than it was on DOC-controlled land. but also if you look internationally, the best natural heritage sites are where Indigenous people have learned to live within the environment. So I think our conservation system is built on a whakaaro of let's lock it up and throw away the key so no one can touch it. And e hara tērā i te whakaaro Māori. E hara hoki tērā i te whakaaro pai that doesn't serve any purpose, I think. But Māori, as I said, learned how to live within the environment, or how to survive in the environment is probably more accurate. So when they ask for these mechanisms, I'm like, there's plenty of evidence out there to support it. They say, my cousin, Hinerangi, she talks about te manukai miro nona te ngahere, te manukai mātauranga nona te ao. But if we say it like that, it's like the ngahere is the booby prize, whereas the ngahere is the prize. Te manukai mātauranga nona te ngahere. And the mātauranga, as far as I'm aware, Doc has access to it. They know that Māori know how to look after the environment. They know that Māori will protect their environment. So maybe they should be the ones eating that mātauranga, so they can have the world, just leave us the ngahere. As for mechanisms as well, I mean, we shouldn't have to prove anything, but I will say our tupuna are buried in this whenua, so we're obviously going to want to protect that. The whenua of our babies are buried in the whenua, so we're going to obviously, the next generation is going to want to protect that as well. But our children are named after these awa, these maunga, and all of these places. So it's in our whakapapa to protect these, which is another interesting whakaaro as well for us in Te Arawa. When we talk about whakapapa, we talk about male, female, and the environment that help create, will help support them, led to the next generation. In a Western paradigm, it's male, female produces offspring. That's genealogy. For us in my area, it's male, female, plus the environment, ka puta ko tātou. So it's part of our whakapapa, it's weaved within us. So if I can leave you with one thing other than that quick brain dump, it's total reform of the conservation system. If we're going to look at hoki whenua mai, let's go for the jugular and tear everything apart. And I'll leave it there.
I love it. Tear everything apart. Total reform of the conservation state. Love that very much. I'm going to pass it over to you, Tāmati.
Tēnā tātou katoa, nā mihi nui, kia koe te katoa. I promote the superstition that I'm a garden of fantastic ideas, but my iwi, unfortunately, is an iwi that's always alive with rumors. But what can you do about that? It's been around about 80 years since Tūhoe settled with the Crown, and some of the, I guess, innovative things that happened there was that the Crown agreed that Te Urewera should never have been a national park, and the Crown agreed that it's right to dismantle that national park and then pass a very historic piece of legislation that says that the land owns itself, that in perpetuity no one will ever own Te Urewera, that it owns itself. This is in keeping with Indigenous tikana and tradition. We do not own the land. In fact, humanity is dependent on nature and on the land. And I think nature would do very, very well if humanity passed away and became extinct. So one of the things in the last 8 years that I want to share with you is that the people in Doc and Tūhoe people, together we love nature, we love land. That has never been a point of dispute between us. In fact, for most people who live in Aotearoa, New Zealand, they discover when they travel overseas that it is the landscape of Aotearoa that is famous, that is well known. And then we get this inkling that as we are exploring who we are and what our identity is, it has something to do with the land. And we've gone past gumboots and hokey pokey and rugby and racing and the Sky Tower. These emblems and symbols have become meaningless. And we think that somewhere in this landscape of Aotearoa, we will find who we are. And the key word there is tangata whenua, being people of the land. Tangata whenua does not mean I own it. It means I care for it. And I regard myself as being part of it, coming from this land. So being a kaitiaki is caring for nature and for the land. I think being tangata whenua and kaitiaki are clues as to who we should become. We should give back the name New Zealand to the rightful people that own it and live in that space. And we should accept that this is the land that will give us our name. So, in the 8 years after settlement, Tūhoe have found that DOC is not the proper representation of the Crown. Our settlement was with the Crown. And our conclusion is DOC was and is not the right representation of our treaty partner. So we want to revisit that with the Crown. And this is with the blessing of DOC as well, that we need to revisit who represents the Crown. Well, Eugenie would know that the Crown has problems with understanding who the Crown is. So there is little of ourselves in the current Conservation Act. The important thing to remember is not to forget that iwi are purposed to govern. We have government duties. We have always had governmental obligations and capacity. So iwi have always been purposed to govern. Our infrastructure of hapu and whānau, these are management and operational entities. The institutions that all iwi have of tapu, noa, mana, mauri, rāhui, and all of these things and others are there to deliver justice, peace, and truth. And all of this without the need to own the land and without the want to amass entitlements to the land. And this is the failure of the Conservation Act. It orbits around very, very primitive ideas like ownership, privilege, entitlement. These are archaic notions that have no place with our relationship with nature and with the environment. The connection between humanity, between us human beings and nature, is not by ownership. It is not by legislation. It is not by economics, but it is as all Indigenous people in the world have always claimed, it is by kinship. That is our true connection and relationship with the land. Tūhoe is most happy not to own Te Urawira. We have never claimed we own it. So the glory of this legislation, the first in the world, recognizing that Papa Tuanuku is alive, is a person, has been long coming for all Indigenous people, and it is the way forward for conservation. That is the way forward, that if we all know and believe that the land is our mother and our mother will never leave us, and the first duty of children is to be devoted to their mother, to look after Papa Tuanuku, then this is what we must do. We must deserve to be tangata whenua of Aotearoa, people of the land. We must deserve to be kaitiaki. We must prove by reputation and track record that stewardship. And in order for us to live up and deserve those titles, we must accept that we are all born with responsibilities, not rights. Te Urawira is the living land. Te Urawira is our mother, Papa Tuanuku. It is the home of Tūhoe. It gives us our name, our identity, and our belonging, as does the land where all other iwi live. Te Urawira is how and why we are Tūhoe, not in the past tense, but now and in the future tense. It is the same for the people that Tame represents, that Roger represents, and everybody else. When we accept that nature, like life, can and will continue without us, human beings, then we understand why we must be humble when we find our connection with nature, and to know that nature will always be better than the best our kind is capable of creating. Our legislations, our economics, our idea of ownership, shareholding, stakeholdership, all of that is rubbish. That is what I think we have to do, is find our place in nature and know our connection with nature and our obligations and responsibilities. So here is Tūhoe and Doc revisiting our philosophies and our ideology around conservation. And we've found that we live on two different planets, and it's okay that we are different, so long as we are not indifferent to each other. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Oh, kia ora koutou. I'm sure that everybody who's here tonight is thankful that they're in this place hearing these words. I love that comment that we must accept we are born with responsibilities, not rights. And that we must be humble when we make that connection with our whenua. We have time for questions, people. So feel free to put something in the Q&A and also make comments in the chat so that our speakers can see those. So Nico has a question here. Tēnā koutou i ngā rangatira, ngā mihi mai oha I kōrero I whakaako mai I a mātou katoa. He pātai tāku. What tools exist at a local government level to ensure the tika return of our whenua and to ensure iwi are supported in their restored kaitiakitanga of the land? And our speakers, if you want to read that question yourselves, you can click on the Q&A and that should come up for you. Who would like to have a go at that?
I think all of the hard questions should go to Roger and Tame. Anyway, I'll have a go at it. I think all Indigenous people, especially here in Aotearoa, all iwi are trying to recover from the injury and hurt of colonization.
Mm.
We don't know how long this will take, but it's something that we are facing, and we are evaluating what we have lost forever, what has been damaged that we can repair and mend and fix, and what we have to innovate and evolve that is missing. It's very important that all iwi confront and face up to that damage of colonization and do our very best to be who we should be. Because the truth is that as a result of colonization, we are not who we are supposed to be. We have fallen, we see ourselves falling short of our own standards and expectations and what we must be. And so we have to turn to ourselves and confront that the enemy is dependency. That the enemy is our adoption of foreign concepts of how we relate and connect to the land. It is very, very difficult because in nearly 200 years, many of us have fallen in love with being a shareholder, with being a stakeholder, with being a majority owner in a block of land, and getting and being a recipient of benefits and privileges. But all of that is a direct contradiction of when we stand on the marae and in our wharenui and talk about Papatuanuku and Ranginui and tapu and noa and whakapapa. It's a contradiction. And this is the terrible nightmare that we are untangling in order to be true. So when we look at what resources are around from Te Puni Kōkiri, DOC or whoever, or regional council and local council to help us reconnect, we are looking at the wrong place. We should be looking at ourselves and growing our capacity and capability to be the scientists. Like Roger says, that in the end, his people have got to be the experts around that roto, that lake, not anybody else. And for Tame, he is the one that everybody has to go to first to find out whatever they need to find out about his place. All of us cannot be an appendix to DOC or to the Ministry of the Environment or anybody else speaking on behalf of our rohe whenua. We've got to start now inching our way distancing ourselves from that dependency on other people.
Kia ora, Tāmati. I'm going to keep on, I'm going to raise another question and see if anyone else would like to answer that one or jump in on following up with Tāmati. So
I'll jump in.
Oh, go for it. Kia ora.
Because there's two questions on the board. But first of all, I'm just talking, I totally agree with what Tāmati has just said. For us, though, it's very much at the local level. And the engagement with the local authority, government, is probably more important day to day than it is with the Crown. And there lies a challenge for all of us. It'll be different in different parts of the country, depending on what relationship you have or may have with your local authority. Because every time you try to do something, you'll run against district plans, regional plans, all sorts of other instruments that are put out there. I watch how people get highly frustrated even mentioning these plans and things. However, you have to be able to look at these because you're going to run into them every time you try and put an initiative on the ground. Now that can be tricky, and it'll be very tricky because it is very local. It can be a positive arrangement, or it can be a negative one, or it can be just people sitting on both sides of the fence, seeing what's going on. But to follow on what Tāmati raised, is that what's at stake at the local level is our tino rangatiratanga. And it's too easy for small groups to be overwhelmed by bureaucracy and by local authority. And get caught into the trap of asking them for funding, being their advisor, answering their demands to know what's the local history, or what do you want, what do people want? And with the best wishes in the world, some of our own people are employed in those agencies, our own whanaunga. And this is something which we possibly never faced before. Certainly my parents and grandparents never faced this sort of thing before. But with our people employed all over the place and using their skills for these local authorities, and in their hearts they want to do the best for us, but there's still a system that they're part of. And so that's a challenge and a warning to our people. But I'd also like to pick up on one other thing, is in our circumstances, because we've been cut off from this taonga of ours, there's a huge disconnect with the present generations. And one of our biggest challenges is to get our people back so they can enjoy these places, so they can recover the mātauranga that goes with these places. right from the whakapapa through to the mahinga kai, and all the techniques and methodologies that our old people used. And in our case, it's recovery. Other iwi might be more fortunate that they have had an unbroken line of oral history. Ours has been broken. So the biggest challenge in our world is to re-establish that connection, so our mokopuna and others can just enjoy and be proud of who they are and their connection, because they don't know these connections at the moment. So while we're battling authorities and working out the best ways to manage them, we're also having to educate, re-educate, and reconnect our people with these taonga. Kia ora.
Kia ora. On to come to you, Tame, and just your thoughts on what the kōrero has been. And as you can see, these questions is the one about what is the best way to fund conservation? What would a proper partnership look like when we rip it all back apart and put it back together?
So yeah, I'll try answer all three questions with a quick little
Haere tonu.
in terms of the local council thing, I mean, there's so many different policies and local legislation, local bills out there and stuff like that. But I would say co-governance is a good start. Advocating for co-governance and even Māori wards is a start. But like I said, we've got conservation all wrong. And so when we're trying to think of how we can merge the two, we're not, that sort of just puts Māori and we're slapping it on the current system. And I use the whakatauki from Taranaki quite a lot. E kore te uku e piriki te rino, clay will never stick to steel. You can't brown something up from the outside. It's got to be brown from the start. So that's why I'm keen to scrap it all. But even the concept of kaitiakitanga, it's never really sat well with me, because ultimately what we should be protecting is ourselves, is our attitude, our behaviors. Kaitiakitanga to me is about us moderating and controlling our own behaviors so we're not impacting the environment. Because at the end of the day, Papa Tuanuku looks after us, ko ia te kaitiaki, we're her children. So of course it's only right that she looks after us. And therein lies, I think, the real driver for change, is we need to scrap this whole conservation. When we think about we're conserving something, that's not what it's about. It should be about, hey, look, we're protecting ourselves from damaging this further, so we can do things like cultural harvest and eat. At the moment, we're setting ourselves up to protect this ngahere or these birds or everything else, but for what, to what end, for what purpose? I mean, ultimately, I'd like to see manu back on the menu. So as we do move towards a future conservation system, I would like, let's get rid of this notion of governance, co-governance, ownership, and start from scratch. What would it look like? Where do we want to get to? And then build up some sort of, you can call it whatever you like, a system that looks after our whenua in the best way possible, that fits for New Zealand, that doesn't just go off, you know, this is what everyone else in the world does. And I think a good place to start is our tupuna. Like I said, it took our tupuna 250 years to figure out how to live in the environment. And then we figured things out pretty quickly after that. And we did pretty well until the arrival of Pākehā. The Pākehā conservation system's been here for what, a couple hundred years now? 200, you know, the treaty's coming up to 200 years. And we haven't seen, we're still seeing things decline at a greater rate than when our tupuna arrived. So I think if we're going to look at a future system, let's look to the past, perhaps. They say if you want to learn a new story, read an old book. If you want new innovation, look to old knowledge. Yeah, I'll probably leave it at that, actually.
Kia ora. I'm looking at, we've promised we'd finished on time tonight, and I just want to go round the room again and just want a final comment to wrap things up. So I'll come to you in order of how you spoke tonight. So we'll come to you, Roger, then Tame, then Tāmati.
Kia ora, no. I think this has been very interesting just to listen to the others and to see some of the questions. Clearly, there's a need for further discussion and be able to burrow down into a number of these issues. I don't think you can do the whole lot in 1 hour's webinar, and not even do it justice, really, because we all know it's such a huge issue, and there's so many different factors. But overall, I agree with what everyone is saying, in the sense that this is our fight for decolonisation of our people and our people's minds, and the reconnection with Papatūānuku and all the treasures that has to be offered. And it's fought at different levels, at a very local level, through to the corporate level, all that, albeit the iwi level, right down to individual whānau who have something within on their horizon, in their backyard. And I think that one shouldn't supersede the other. They all have to go together. That as much energy has to go into the individual whānau who are fighting to get back a favourite eeling spot, as is to a iwi trying to reclaim its maunga. Because too much emphasis on one thing will lose out at the other end. So thank you for allowing me to participate in this thing. I've learned a lot, and hope to join in again and learn some more. Kia ora tātou.
Over to me. Tūtahi ake tēnei ka mihi ki a koe, Elizabeth. Nau I whakawātea tēnei pai kōrero kia noho tātou, kia kōrero kia wānanga tahi tātou. Utsira kia kōrua, I whakamana ake I tēnei pai kōrero, tēnei ka mihi kia kōrua. Utsira kia koutou katoa, I whakapiri mai, noho areare mai, tēnei ka mihi kia koutou katoa hoki. I think there was a few things we didn't touch on. One is racism. It is alive and well. So anytime we want to talk about things like Hoki Whenua mai and anything else, not only is there legislation, policy and strategy that get in the way of that, but there are also people who naturally put up barriers. Racism being the big driver for that, but I also think another one is fear. For far too long, power has been held by certain people in this country over the rights and interests of tangata whenua, and those people aren't tangata whenua. And the fear comes that they're going to lose that power. But we've seen plenty of time that when Māori do get full power back, it benefits everyone. So it's about having those hard conversations, those courageous conversations to address that racism, but alleviate those fears and concerns of people that, hey, it could be a brighter future for everyone. And for those racists, I always like to think that, no doubt they're going to have some Māori in their whānau soon. They'll have Māori mokopuna, and that will hopefully change their minds. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. I do believe that the principles, values and kawa of conservation, or whatever the proper term should be, can only come from tangata whenua, because they've been here the longest and they have a heart and mind memory of the connection and relationship that is right, decent and proper with nature and the environment. So I think Aotearoa New Zealand, the state government, should be accepting that the underlying values, the tāhuhu of this whare, those values, principles, and kawa must come from tangata whenua. And I agree with the notions that Roger and Tame have elevated around conservation. Now doesn't appear to be the right notion that embraces the society that we want to be. But rather, I think we need something that is teaching us about our relationship and our connection with nature and with the environment. Because we so badly need to know how we belong and how we connect with each other. We still haven't figured this out in this country, this idea of nationhood. And so it's terrifying for non-Māori to hear words that are very foreign to them, like ranatiratana, like mana motuhake, like tangata whenua. And yet these are the terms and these are the ideas that will connect us and cause us to belong somewhere and to have a relationship with each other. Tame's point about the racism is correct. It's like a sinking ship firing on the rescue ship. You know, the rescue ship is iwi, from rescuing this country from the destruction of the very thing that we need to exist and to belong and to have a relationship with. Yeah, so very grateful, like everybody else, for the opportunity to share ideas. Kia ora tata.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you so much for everything you've shared with us tonight. We've got a lot of appreciative comments in the chat. If you've been following those, some people have asked and had other ideas, things they'd like to contribute to the kōrero around DOC. You are really welcome to send those ideas to Te Mātawaka. We're the Māori and Pacifica, which probably should have been in my introduction. I'm chair of our Māori and Pacifica caucus. And Sian is going to send a message to everybody who was here tonight and can give you links to a bit more about our speakers and how you can give feedback. So if you've got other ideas, we very much welcome that. We're looking for clarity on the things that we can do that will make them the most difference, and what things where we can open up space for other people to get on with what they need to do. So I'll close our hui here. I would like to close with one of my favourite whakatauki, which is Ma pango ma whero kautia te mahi. With the red and the black, with your effort, with our combined thoughts and minds and hearts, we will get the work done. So kia ora koutou, thank you so much for being here tonight and giving some of your evening to have this kōrero with us here. And thank you so much to each of our speakers. We'll close our hui now. Enjoy the rest of your evening, everybody. And if our speakers would like to come and be part of our debrief, there's a separate email in your, a separate link in your email, but otherwise, that's us people.